This is Rehabilitation Counseling Theory and Practice 2, RC-660, and I'm Dr. Feast Price, and I will be your lecturer for the next 8 weeks. Today's lecture is entitled The Counseling Process. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am so that you have a frame of reference to understand some of the information I'll be sharing with you. I have my doctoral degree in rehabilitation counseling, but also I have a PhD in counseling psychology. I've worked as a psychologist in the correctional settings, both state and federal. I've also received some practical experience in counseling and testing centers, and I've done some private practice counseling as well. So the information that I'll be sharing with you over the next lectures will come from both my experiences as a rehabilitation counselor as well as my professional and academic knowledge as a counseling psychologist. In talking about the counseling process, I'd like for us to think about the following objectives that we will be discussing. First, we'll be talking about counseling theory. We'll also be talking about counseling philosophy. We will continue with counseling characteristics, and we will conclude with verbal and nonverbal communication skills. Professional counseling defined. It's important that we have a frame of reference by which we can understand the counseling process. If you think about the word counseling, it's used a lot in a lot of different venues. So the word counseling has today taken on a lot of different connotations. For example, even people that are getting debt counseling, they use the word counseling to describe what they're receiving. There's also the word counseling that's used as it relates to mental health. So I want you to keep in mind the fact that the word counseling can be used in many different ways and in many different contexts. But for the purpose of this class, professional counseling is defined as the application of mental health, psychological, and human development principles through cognitive, affective, behavioral, and systemic interventions that address wellness, personal growth, and career development. Again, it's the application of mental health, psychological, and human development principles through cognitive, affective, behavioral, and systemic interventions that address wellness, personal growth, and career development. Counseling and theory. There are 5 dominant theoretical frameworks that relate to the counseling process. There's the psychodynamic or the psychoanalytic frame of reference. And the psychodynamic, psychoanalytic deals with the unconscious. And whenever you think of psychodynamic, always Sigmund Freud is the father of this theoretical framework. There's also cognitive behavioral types of theories. Researchers realized that it's not enough just to understand a person from their unconscious frame of reference, but there's also a need to understand people in terms of their cognitions or the way they think, as well as their behavior or the way in which they behave or function in certain situations or settings. There's also humanistic theory, which is more person-centered. It focuses on the individual, and it looks at the ways in which an individual develops his or her sense of self. There's the transpersonal approaches, which deals specifically with spiritual aspects of the human experience. There was a time when one's spiritual aspects were not considered as it relates to their behaviors or their cognitions, but theories of counseling has evolved to a place where they recognize the spirituality of individuals and how that plays a role in the way in which persons behave and the ways in which they think, as well as the ways in which they interact with others. Cybernetics is another theoretical framework, and it deals with systems therapy. And when we think of systems therapy, we realize that as individuals, none of us function within a vacuum. We function within systems. We are a part of families. We are a part of networks. We're a part of communities, cultures, a part of a nation, a part of a country, and a part of the human race. So cybernetics takes into consideration the fact that individuals are a part of systems, and sometimes the issues or problems that exist within a person's life is connected with their system. Sometimes it's a family system, sometimes it's an employment system, but it forces us to recognize, cybernetics forces us to recognize the systems with which persons function. There are most preferred theoretical approaches. Seconds ago, we talked about the different theoretical frames of reference. Research has been conducted to look at various theoretical frameworks and those that are proven to be most effective. Before sharing what research shows by Prochaska and Necross, it's important to say that there are easier ways to assess the effectiveness of some therapeutic frameworks versus others. For example, whenever we look at behavioral approaches, it's much easier to look at behavior and to determine whether behavior has changed over time. Whereas with other kinds of theoretical approaches, it's less difficult to determine behavioral changes. But as it relates to preferred theoretical approaches, 37% of clinicians that are practicing prefer an eclectic approach. And when we talk about an eclectic approach, we're talking about the fact that clinicians borrow from multiple frames of reference. They might be use some cognitive behavioral strategies. They may also incorporate some humanistic or person-centered strategies. They may include some behavioral kinds of strategies or approaches. So an eclectic clinician uses theoretical techniques and approaches from various theoretical frameworks, and 37% of clinicians rely on an eclectic approach. I will say that for myself as a clinician, I have a cognitive behavioral foundation. I think it's important to be foundational and have a foundation as a frame of reference from which to build on. And even though I'm a cognitive behaviorist, I too am eclectic because I borrow from various other frame of references. For example, I definitely borrow from the person-centered therapeutic approach because I believe that clients are to be treated a certain way, treated with unconditional positive regard, treated authentically. I also believe in a systemic approach where we focus on the system in which a person comes from. So I believe in having a foundation by which to build from or build to an eclectic approach. 13% of clinicians have an existential or a humanistic therapeutic approach, and 10% have a cognitive therapeutic approach, which focuses primarily on the way in which people think. 8% has more of a person-centered therapeutic approach, 8% psychodynamic, dealing with the unconscious, and 7% focus on systemic theories or therapeutic approaches, and 6% focus on a behavioral therapeutic approach. So based upon research done by Prochaska and Necross, this outlines the preferred approaches that are used by practicing clinicians. So when we think about all of the various therapeutic approaches, it's important to note that there are many commonalities or similarities that exist across them. Sometimes when you look at the differences that exist, sometimes it can be like splitting hairs, and there are far more commonalities that exist within a therapeutic approach than there are differences. And so this slide talks about the commonalities that exist among various therapeutic approaches. First, counseling involves responding to the feelings, thoughts, and actions of the individual. Second, counseling involves a basic acceptance of the client's perceptions and feelings, regardless of outside evaluative standards. Third, confidentiality and privacy constitutes the essential ingredients in the counseling setting. Number 4, counseling is voluntary. 5, counselors operate with a conservative bias against communicating to the client detailed information about his or her own life. Number 6, communication is essential. 7, counseling is at minimum a cross-cultural experience and probably a multicultural experience. So when you look at all of the various theoretical approaches, all of them hold these tenets that are very similar, and very few differences exist across the different therapeutic approaches. Counseling and philosophy. One of the things that's important to recognize is that among the various therapeutic approaches, there are philosophical tenets that are associated with them. And there are 4 primary philosophical positions of counseling. The first is essentialism. So what is essentialism? Essentialism assumes that human beings are rational by nature, that reason is the natural goal of education, and that the classical thinkers are the chief repository of reason. So basically, all human beings are rational, and we all have very natural goals to achieve, aspire, and to draw meaning in our everyday experiences. Progressivism is the second philosophical position of counseling, and it is concerned with the fundamental question, what will work? Knowledge is based on experimental results. Truth is identified through consequences, and values are relative rather than absolute. The third philosophical position is existentialism. And existentialism holds that life's meaning is to be found in the individual, not the environment or the event. It's within the individual. The fourth philosophical position of counseling is postmodernism. And postmodernism suggests that there are the fundamental questions that are raised. What is real? This question is particularly relevant in terms of the client's experience versus an external reality. So what is real? Not just based on an individual experience, but based upon their external reality. Because as we know, each of us function within an external reality, no matter what we believe. Continuing along the lines of understanding philosophy in the context of counseling, we have to understand the role that culture plays and how it relates to interpersonal relations. There are three major abilities that are necessary in working with clients of different cultures. The first is maximizing the amount of thoughts, words, and behaviors that allow communication within a given culture. We have to recognize that there are some cultures that do not advocate certain thinking, certain individualistic thinking. It's more of a collective thinking. Second, we have to understand maximizing the amount of thoughts, words, and behaviors that allow communication across a variety of diverse groups and individuals. Third, there is the ability to formulate plans and actions that respond to the many possibilities existing in culture, and then to evaluate those actions. Counseling and philosophy. Continued. Culture plays a complex role in interpersonal relationships. There are three major abilities that are necessary in working with clients of different cultures. First, maximizing the amount of thoughts, words, and behaviors that allow communication within a given culture. Second, as clinicians, we must maximize the amount of thoughts, words, and behaviors that allow communication across a variety of diverse groups and individuals. Third, the ability to formulate plans and actions that respond to the many possibilities existing in culture, and then to evaluate those actions. There are various characteristics that are known to exist for effective counseling. Successful counseling has 4 types of outcomes. First, clients begin to perceive their problems and issues from quite different contexts. Not every client will perceive a problem in a given situation, and oftentimes it's one's perceptions of the problem that lead to whatever the outcome is. Second, clients develop a more useful understanding of problems and issues. So as a result of counseling, it is expected that clients will have a more broader understanding of what their problems and issues are. And based upon understanding their problems and issues, they are better able to look at ways of remedying these problems. Third, clients acquire new responses to old issues. So as a result of a client being in the therapeutic process, they learn new ways of solving existing problems, recognizing that old ways of behaving or functioning are ineffective or maladaptive, and choosing to acquire new responses to existing problems. The fourth characteristic of effective counseling is the client learns how to develop effective relationships. Through the therapeutic relationship, the client-counselor relationship, clients learn more effective ways of having healthy relationships. And in my experiences, particularly in the correctional setting, the client-counselor relationship is oftentimes the most healthy relationship a client has ever had. And that's why it becomes increasingly important that clients and counselors protect the relationship and ensure a healthy relationship. Continuing along our thinking related to characteristics of effective counseling, self-awareness and understanding is very important. As clinicians, we have to be self-aware. We have to understand who we are, what our limitations are, and what our biases are. It's not to say that we change everything about who we are as clinicians, but through understanding who we are, it provides us with an opportunity to minimize the negative impact that we can have with clients. So, as a clinician, I firmly believe that it's important for us to understand who we are as clinicians, as individuals, as persons, and understand how those issues pertaining to who we are can impact, particularly in a negative way, the interactions we might have with our clients. It's also important to recognize that through self-awareness and understanding, we too can have a positive impact on our clients. Because through self-awareness and understanding, we are able to empathize with clients in ways that can be very beneficial, understanding the circumstances the client is in, the dilemma that the client is dealing with. So self-awareness and understanding can have both a positive connotation, but as well as a negative impact on our client if we're not aware. Good psychological health is another factor that's really important to having an effective counselor-client relationship. There are times in everyone's life that you might be going through different issues or problems, and when those problems exist, as clinicians, it's important that we are in good psychological health. There are times that we as helpers must seek help in order to maintain our own psychological health and well-being. We must also be sensitive to and understanding of racial, ethnic, and cultural factors in ourselves and others. It's wonderful to believe that we live in a utopia where everything is well and good and beautiful and fair and just. But unfortunately, we live in a world where there are realities that are to the contrary. And so we have to be sensitive to the facts that there are various forms of racial, ethnic, and cultural factors that may impede on the well-being of others. We must also be open-minded. And when we're open-minded, we are able to see and understand the world or the experiences through the client's frame of reference, not through our own understanding, but through the client's frame of reference. As clinicians, with working with our clients, we must always be objective. To the extent of our ability, we must objectively understand issues relevant to our clients rather than forming negative perceptions or judgments from our own frame of reference. So objectivity is very important, and it's something that we should all aspire for. Competent. We must be competent in the provision of services to those with whom we meet with. If we are not competent, it's our ethical responsibility to refer the client to someone who has the knowledge base and competence to provide them with the needed services. One of the reasons that you are in this rehabilitation counseling program is to gain competence. And so it's our hope that you gain the competence needed to work with various clients, regardless of racial, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds. And when you find yourself in a position where you don't have the knowledge base, it's our ethical responsibility to refer our clients to persons who can provide effective services. Trustworthy. It's important that we are trustworthy, that we maintain information about clients that is confidential, that clients feel that they can trust us with some of their most private information. So as clinicians, we are in a position of privilege. And the reason I say we're in a position of privilege is because clients are entrusting their most private and personal information to us. Therefore, we have a responsibility to protect this information. Research shows that confidentiality is one of the primary ethical breaches that exist between clients and counselors. And this means that information is shared about clients that should be kept confidential. So, in our position of being trustworthy, we have to make sure that we protect information relevant to our client that is bestowed to us. Interpersonal attractiveness. This means that we are good interpersonal communicators. Many times, the client's ability to develop trustworthiness comes from their ability to have an exchange of information. So we are required to have good interpersonal skills. And what are some good interpersonal skills? We are attentive to what the client is saying. We are affirming when the client is doing things that are good. We give good guidance and support. And so interpersonal attractiveness is what helps to build trustworthiness. So be mindful of your interpersonal communication skills. Our ability to be warm and engaging, to smile, and to engage the person on an interpersonal level. So when we talk about interpersonal attractiveness, this is what we're talking about: our ability to be warm, engaging, attentive, so that clients feel comfortable trusting us with relevant information and sharing information that is painful and private and has not, in many instances, has not been shared with others before. This will end part 1 of lecture 1 under the counseling process.